My name is Hitesh Hathi. I'm the head of the Mittal Institute, and it's a particular honor to be here today. We have had a series of very distinguished guests that I've had the pleasure of introducing in the last few weeks. I'm thinking ambassadors, ministers of state, other, luminaries of culture. But honestly, I'm most excited about being here today because, first of all, Pradeep has brought such an extraordinary amount of gentle, calm intelligence and goodwill. But in general, because we love having these fellows here, Pradeep, and is our other fellow here? I think they're all here. So, there you are. There's Anu. So, the fellows that come to the Mittal Institute, they do original research which advances the field they're in, which is really connected to the ground in very fundamental ways. So it combines theory and practice with a kind of knowledge on the ground that it's very hard to get unless you're there. And Pradeep is a wonderful example of that. So I'm really honored to be here to introduce this talk. The Mittal Institute, for those of you who don't know, we do a variety of work, everything from healthcare to pure science to humanities, medicine, art history, and art. We do especially interdisciplinary work, though all kinds. We fund student research and faculty research all across South Asia. And the big project we're doing currently is climate change. And we're already on the ground in Bangladesh and in India, and soon to be working in Pakistan. But really at the heart of what it is an exchange of ideas and knowledge. And what we learned early on is it's not really bringing Harvard's knowledge to South Asia, it's also bringing South Asia's knowledge to Harvard. And that's what we're going to do today. So with that, I promised you I'm the least intelligent, so let me just get out soon before I embarrass myself any further to say, Aisha has agreed to be Pradeep's mentor while at Harvard, and she's the moderator for this talk. And it's a privilege to introduce her. We hadn't met, but we realized we should be working with her much more often. And just if you'll allow me a brief introduction, and Aisha will introduce Pradeep. Aisha Khizar Yousafzai is a professor of child development and health in the Department of Global Health and Population at the Chan School of Public Health. Her research focuses on promoting the well-being of children and the stability of families among disadvantaged and vulnerable populations in low and middle countries. She especially focuses on South Asia, East and Southern Africa, and she examines both child development and systems as a whole, specifically with an intent to demonstrating how interventions that can promote early childhood development can be mainstreamed effectively into existing structures and systems. So Aisha, thank you, and I pass it over to you.
Thank you. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Pradeep Choudhury, who's the visiting fellow here, an assistant professor of economics from India, who works in the area of applied economics and development, and really is examining those relationships between access to education and its impacts on social mobility, economic inequalities, as well as family investments in human capital for children. And more recently, his work has expanded into the area where our work intersects, which is in early childhood care and education. And on a personal note, it's been a great joy to be able to work with him since August, and I look forward to ongoing collaboration. So without any further ado, this is an opportunity really for Pradeep to present his most recent analysis about the early childhood education landscape in India. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening to all. It's my pleasure to be here. Before getting into my talk, I must thank a couple of people who have considerably contributed to my study. One is the first one, Mittal Institute, Hitesh and colleagues, Salman and others, who have given me a great opportunity to be here. And this is a great learning space for me, as I have experienced since July. I have arrived here, not necessarily in Mittal, but entire Harvard and beyond Harvard, I would say. I visited Northeastern, Cornell, and many other places. So it gave me a very interesting opportunity to explore myself and to explore others as well. It's not necessarily that only academic learning happens in Mittal, what he has told, but I would also add saying that we celebrate lots of festivals, including Indian festivals. And yesterday we had Halloween.
Yes.
Still the decoration is on, but I could not enjoy a bit because I was busy with preparing my slides. But still I looked at it, I enjoyed a bit, I had some toffees and all. So it was very interesting to be here in Mittal. So it's a great learning space for me, as I told. I join with you for this. My second thanks goes to Aisha, who contributed immensely in shaping this study till the end of the day, because sometimes you promise that you should give your kind of assignment in time, but it doesn't happen. It happens with everyone. And she tolerated that. And then finally, she has given very interesting inputs. And it gave me it shaped the study very well. And I found after my PhD supervision with my mentor, I found this is something I realized that this is something very different. And this will definitely improve my supervising skills for my PhD students and JNU. Thank you for that, doing this. And my final one is my family, who contributed a lot. And my wife and son are sitting in the other corner. So they helped me a lot. My sometimes midnight work and all they tolerated. So I thank to them for their contributions.
Exactly.
So thank you for everyone deserves stuff. So thank you very much for that. So this is an idea that I am getting in inequalities in early childhood education in India. So this is both theoretical policy relevance and have empirical understanding of the topic. So let us go ahead. So this is some of the things that I am trying to analyze. One is about the significance of early childhood education. Many of you know, but I will highlight a few of the points that are very important to us. Second one is about policy focus. Then I will talk about evidence of global inequalities in early childhood education. What is the global landscape? Then an overview of the early childhood education structure in India, how it goes, because Indian structure is a little different than other countries. So given an international audience, I will be highlighting that. Then I will get into study objectives, then description of the data, the descriptive evidence that we get from the analysis, then the empirical analysis of the idea, then some key takeaways and policy implications. And the final one will be some future directions for research, which I look forward to collaborating with all of you, particularly with Aisha that we have discussed. Let us move ahead. So if you get into this, I think this is well known. If you see the World Development Report 2018, that is an interesting report on learning crisis, you will see that they have clearly specified returns to early childhood education is considerably higher compared to equivalent investment in the later years of education. It combines both public and private. It's not only public. Like if government invests money on early childhood education, it gives better outcome, like better returns. Even that same is the case for families. If families invest a lot, then in early childhood education, then definitely it gives better returns than if the same amount of money if you are trying to invest in the later part of your life. So that is a very interesting and important message that gives to us that how important is the early childhood education. There are some estimations that says the economic return to early childhood education is as high as 13 times. You can see that if you invest $1 on the early childhood education, you will get 13 US dollar as returns. So there are estimations by World Bank, UNICEF. So it's very interesting to look at it. So what I'm trying to say here, that early years of life matters the most. So it is very, very important to understand that how interesting how important is the early childhood education for the global well-being or in the entire global society. So that's one thing that we should understand very clearly. The picture is very clear in this, that like the graph downwards, because it's at the peak when you invest in the early years, and then it goes down. If you see the other component, that is very clear. The picture may not be very clear, but I can see, so you can also see. But we can have, if there will be any concerns with you, then we can discuss it. Countries with children who are not developmentally on track also tend to have low levels of pre-primary education. So what it says very clearly that the countries with, other way around, the countries with better pre-primary education, access to better quality pre-primary education, they are the countries where the children are better on development. And that development consists of many things. I'm not going to explain here, but if you read the Global Education Monitoring Report 21-22, page 244, it is very clearly explained how it is. So what it is like to briefly say about the developmental developments on track, that means what are the indicators? It's about child well-being, it's about child's learning outcome in the later part of life, and several other indicators are included on that. So there is a positive trend between early childhood education, or I can say pre-primary education. I'm using them alternatively. Sometimes I use preschools, though there are some technical differences, but here I'm trying to do that in that context, not much differences. So that is, there is a very clear positive relationship between the way the child are developed and the access to pre-primary education. Here, if you see, we have great amount of literature on early childhood education and learning outcome of children. And I will be getting into that in the Indian context with my analysis. But before that, what global picture says. There are some studies in UNICEF 2019 report. These are great reports on early childhood education. In West and Central Africa, children with pre-primary experience are more likely to perform better in literacy and math. And they have estimated how times, like it is 3 times higher if the child is attending pre-primary education, their learning outcome, than the children without any pre-primary exposure. So they have estimated quantitatively how it is. So you can see this graph that very clearly on literacy and math, always the children who are accessing pre-primary education having better math outcomes, having better math literacy, having better literacy outcomes. So that is very, very clear that how important it is early childhood education on children's learning outcome and later part of the education. It is grade 2 and sometimes they have estimated also on grade 6. So it like the impact continues, the early childhood education impact on children's learning outcome that continues a lot. Countries with children who are not, I think it went, yeah. So if you see this, it's not necessarily only about children's education and their learning outcome or their well-being. It is children's pre-primary education also connects to overall well-being of the family and society. So this is one example. There are a hell lot of examples, many examples of this kind. One is, if there is a better access to children, then there is a higher women's participation in the labor market. I think this is an area that is increasing because if you see this year's Nobel laureate, so she also worked on the women's labor force participation and gender inequality in earnings and labor market. Also.
Sorry, I'm here.
No, we're just starting.
Oh, okay.
You the preliminary with these comments and they're shared right then. Hello. Welcome.
So this is very clear that it's not about only children's learning and children's well-being. It is very much about others or mothers. There are also other instances which says that if there is a better early childhood education, then governments needs to invest less on crime also. There is a reduction in crime. The government needs to invest less on health. So there are many other externalities that early childhood education produces in the society. That's very, very clear, the literature. Let me get into the global policy focus. This is not only about the empirical evidence on the literature or even the studies. Also, there is a policy focus on this. If you see the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals that aims to ensure universal quality early childhood development. Very interestingly, it is one of the priority area of the Sustainable Development Goals in the list. In the target is by 2030, this should come up. And this is an essential for attaining many of the Sustainable Development Goal targets. For example, if you want to reduce inequality, reduce poverty, reduce crime, reduce gender inequality, all that matters. And this is one important mechanism, one of the important mechanisms that helps in achieving other Sustainable Development Goals. These 2 important indicators on early childhood development that is very clear in Sustainable Development Goals. One is proportion of child aged 24 to 59 months who are developmentally on track in health, learning, and psychosocial well-being by gender, because gender is an important focus of the Sustainable Development Goal that is clear in all the listed goals. Participation rate in organized learning 1 year before the official primary entry age by gender. So these are 2 important targets. If you see, there are many global policies have come up in early childhood education. The other one I am trying to highlight here is making early childhood education compulsory. If you see this at the global level, it is being highlighted that this should be a fundamental right for every child. They should get early years of education. If you see the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989, it is as early as 1989. And then the recent report of UNICEF 2023, that also tells that this must come as a fundamental right for children. You cannot ignore it. Let us get into the evidence of some global inequalities in early childhood education. If you see, there are some of the ideas that I got from interesting reports of UNICEF, World Bank, and other developmental organizations. In high-income countries, if you see, 83% of the children are enrolled in pre-primary education. This is only 22% in low-income countries. There is a clear difference of, we would say, extraordinary gap of 61%, 83 and 22. So there is a huge global inequality among countries by income groups. You see this, why it happens? When there are some examinations to the idea that why it happens, why there is an inequality, 2-3 important points very clearly comes up. One is the income level, that poverty. If you see the UNICEF 2019 report, it says richest children are 7 times more likely to attend early childhood education program in the global level. And similarly, the other important factor which I have also analyzed in my analysis, Indian case, is mother's education. So if mothers are educated, the children are 5 times more likely to attend early childhood education. So there is a clear inequality, and that inequality comes from families. So that is an interesting story that comes up very clearly, which motivated me to understand the inequalities, like social and regional inequalities in the Indian context. If you see, there is also rural-urban gap. Rural kids are in a disadvantageous position. So they are 2.5 times more likely like urban children than rural. That is very, very clear. But one thing that we are trying to celebrate is about boys and girls. So we don't find much gender inequality still this is global level. But what is the story in Indian case? I will tell you about the gender inequalities. Is it at par, or is there a regional gender inequality even at the low income countries? Sorry, not low, even lower middle income countries like India, that story will come up. But this is the kind of global inequalities that you can see here by region, the inequalities. There is evidence of growing privatization. And one of the interesting understanding I got is about the private sector participation in early childhood education, because this is an area that I get into. All kinds of, in all levels of education, but this is very interesting for me. This inequality that comes up is one of the important reasons for this is extensive, like what you call, increasing presence of the private sector in all levels of education across the globe. But in early childhood education, it is more, you can see. The percentage of enrollment in pre-primary education in private institutions, you can see differs very significantly. If you see East Asia, even South Asia, they are largely, you see low-income countries. They are less in the early childhood education, but they are at the top in the private sector participation in early childhood education. You can see very clearly here. South Asia, 54% of the early childhood education participation or enrollment is in private. And East Asia and the Pacific is 55%. They are at the top. And if you see Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, even the developed countries which are lying here at the bottom, so there the private participation in early childhood education is the bottommost. So you see the contradictions. This gives an interesting picture to analyze further, the Indian case. Very interestingly, this is. Another thing, if you see, very related to the other one, which is on private sector. If you invest a lot on early childhood education, the government invests, the public expenditure, that gives you an advantages. You can see a very increasing trend. So countries that allocate a higher proportion of spending on childcare, this is government spending, and early learning tend to have higher enrollment rates. So if government is investing a lot on early childhood education, that actually helps the children to get into the schools, early childhood education. So at one point of time, we are seeing that, okay, the early childhood education, if government is investing on early childhood education, it is better. More children are coming to schools. But at the same time, in low-income countries, you see that there is an increasing presence of the private sector. So there is a contradiction in this case. And India is in between, in the contradiction. So it will be very interesting to see the case for India. Hope the things are clear till time. If any questions, you can raise your, if that is the kind. If there will be any clarificatory questions, I will be happy to clarify. Let us get into this. An overview of EC structure in India. So you saw very interestingly, there is a global inequality in early childhood education across income groups, then regions, then including the private sector participation and all that. That's very, very clear. If you see the data in India, I think India is the most populous country. We ahead of China. So that's clear, very clear. And if you see, I was looking at the child data also, 0 to 6 years age. That also, India is one of the top. Like we have almost 160 million children in the age group of 0 to 6. And it is almost 22% of the total global children in the age group of 0 to 6. So we are catering to a very high share of the children in the age group of 0 to 6. So it is important to look at India. It's very difficult to escape. So that's the point. Because a large part of the children in the age group of 0 to 6 are in India. So it's important to see where they are going, what kind of learning they are doing in the early ages. Because I connect this point with the idea that, okay, early education matters the most in the life. It's not about only in the latter part of learning, I would say the life opportunities. So it's very, very clear. This is an international audience. I must get into some of the interesting points on early childhood education structure in India. There are 3 major provisioning of early childhood education in India. One is there is something called Anganwadi centers. I will come to that next point. Something is there. The second one is private preschools, then government preschools. The Anganwadi centers are a network of community-based centers run under the national flagship program of the Integrated Child Development Service Scheme, ICDS. This is sponsored by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India. Currently, there are 1.3 million Anganwadi centers. That is scattered many, like even rural, urban, everywhere. In most of the places, you will see Anganwadi centers in India. And it is running for long. It is running for long. If I'm not wrong, so it is running from 90s. There are 6 main functions of Anganwadi workers, like who are working in Anganwadi centers. We call them Anganwadi workers. There are 2 people work in each Anganwadi centers. One is Anganwadi worker, the other one is Anganwadi helper. Anganwadi worker is a kind of little higher at the top, and then somebody who helps. So they work on 6 areas. One is supplementary nutrition to the children, preschool non-formal education. This is one component they have. Immunization, health checkup, nutrition and health education, and referral services. But these are the noted one that is in the document. But they do very, outside of these things, they do many things. I think who are from India, they know that they go for surveys, government this, and in COVID time, they did so many things for the benefit of the people. So they contribute a lot to the welfare, welfare of Indian society. So that's very recognized, very much recognized. But one component here you can see is preschool non-formal education is also a component of Anganwadi. So that's the reason we have included. This is one point where Anganwadis contribute to early childhood education. Children between age 0 to 6 years, pregnant women, then children or mothers with newborn babies are the beneficiaries of this nationwide scheme. Around 40% of the children under age 3 to 6 years attend Anganwadi centers in India. That's very, very clear. The estimation of RA, recent estimation, 2021. There are about 300,000 private preschools across the country. Close to 60% of the primary schools have pre-primary sections in India. Of the total children attending pre-primary education in India, 2/3 are in private unaided schools. And the other one, which is government preschools, I have not noted much because we don't have much information on that. That is one. But if you see, they are minute. Not many government schools have pre-primary sections. So they start with grade 1. That's the real story. But I will come into a few other understanding of government schools in my analysis. Yeah, this one point I have told, only about 20% of government primary schools have pre-primary sections with an enrollment share of less than 30%. They are at the bottom of the 3 that I am trying to say here. And the story is very different than Anganwadis and private preschools. The story is very different in government schools. That I will also elaborate or discuss in my talk. So what the studies, I think there are quite a few good number of studies on all these 3 settings. One is Anganwadis, private preschools, and government preschools. One important finding that I must mention here, there is considerable socioeconomic inequalities and access to different types of early childhood education programs. This is one Anganwadi, private preschool, and government preschool. There is a hierarchy in this, and the access also differs considerably by socioeconomic inequality, by socioeconomic groups. This is very interesting to look at. I think some of you have understood, know about the NEP, National Education Policy 2020. India got in July 2020, in the mid of COVID-19. They adopted, it was being adopted. And this came after almost 2.5 decades. The other one was 86. Not 3.5 decades. So the other National Education Policy Government of India got is 86. So this is the policy that came after 3.5 decades of gap. So this is an interesting and immense interest to the education policy discourse in India. So we must understand this. I'm not getting into what the policy is all about because I'm getting into the idea of how it has emphasized the early childhood education. One of the important emphasis, the starting point of this policy is early childhood education. Very, very interesting. And it is a celebrating point. Many people, many academicians, policymakers, they come up to celebrate this point. And I also wish to celebrate here that how EC has been focused in NEP. NEP 2020 highlights the importance of foundational literacy and numeracy to improve children's learning outcome. Because India is one of the countries having lowest learning outcomes among children. If you see the World Development Report 2018, it is even little above Malawi. Little above Malawi, but like it is considerably at lowest. Children are going to school, but they are not learning. So the message is very, very clear. And the children who are learning, the children who are getting into private schools, that to elite private schools, they are the children, those are the children who are learning. The children getting into public schools, children getting into Anganwadi, children getting into other places are not learning. The message is very, very clear. So this policy said that one of the important interventions we need is to improve early childhood education. Because that is having a good connection with our later years learning. As I said, this policy admits that very clearly. Quality early childhood education is not available to millions of young children in India, particularly children from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And it suggests strong investment in EC. It did not say which investment. It did not say public investment or private investment. It said investment in early childhood education. It aims to create a comprehensive and expanded early childhood education system consisting of Anganwadis, pre-primary schools, recruitment of workers, teachers, specifically trained teachers in the curriculum and pedagogy of early childhood education, preparing a national curricula and pedagogical framework for early childhood care and education. This has been done. A draft report is available in NCRT, National Council of Educational Research and Training. That is the body for schools till grade 12. The national body. So there you will see this report. They have prepared a national curriculum pedagogical framework, which was not existing in India. So it's important to look at that document. Very comprehensive document on that. I'm not getting into that debate. Very clear. This recommends universal provisioning of high quality early childhood education for children aged 3 to 6 as soon as possible. This is their language. And not later than 2030. To ensure that all students entering grade 1 are school ready. So this is the message that policy gives. Hope I'm doing well in the time. Yeah, okay. So let me get into this. If this is the picture, India is where large chunk of the children from 0 to 6 are lying. There is a policy document have come up. This is a low middle income country. So what is happening in India? What's the story? So let me explain that. So what we are going to do in this, there are two specific objectives. First, to analyze the regional and socio-economic inequalities in access to early childhood education. And also, it's not about only access, it's also about how much family invest in early childhood education in India. What factors are responsible for inequality in access to different types of early childhood education provisions? Because it's not very homogeneous, it's very heterogeneous. As I said, there are Anganwadis, there are schools with government schools with pre-primary sections, there are private schools. Within private pre-primary schools, there is heterogeneity. You will get elite private schools where you need $1,000 to get in, and there are very low level of early childhood education private schools. You need a couple of dollars to get into that. So there is a huge variety of even within private schools. So it's important to examine that. To examine, yeah. Okay.
It's about the private home stats since you're comparing. Is it that 55% of South Asian students in general go to private schools, or is it 55% of students who are in early childhood education go private for this childhood?
The data is like the children who, out of the total children in South Asia who are enrolled in early childhood education, out of that 55% are attending private and 45% are in the rest, government, Anganwadis, whatever. Because South Asia, there are other provisions in Bangladesh, in other countries. So in that context. So whatever the other non-state, I can say it's state and non-state. So you can say it is 55% non-state sector participation. No, among the total who are participating. That's a good question. Thank you. So other study objective is to examine how differential access to early childhood education among children produces, or I would say reproduces, learning inequalities in India. Do children accessing private preschools perform better than the children accessing Anganwadis or public preschools? So it's important to understand that, what is happening in the picture. What data I use? We use 3 data sets. One is National Statistical Survey, 75th education round, done in 2017-18. This is the latest education round available in India. India Human Development Survey, 2011 latest. It is pretty old, I would say, but it is the latest one. This gives some interesting information. So I have used. We are expecting the 3rd round, which is, but it's not yet. I met Sonali Desai in Cornell, but she is saying that it takes time. So you still rely on the 2nd round. This is 2011-12. I was trying to get a message and update this, but I could not. The other one is Annual Status of Education Report, ASER data 2022, which is very recent. And recently I got that data from Rukmani. So it is very interesting to analyze these 3 data sets and get some sense out of this. Let me spend some time on each data set. Not much time, but to make what this, because this is an international audience. Some of you might be knowing, some of you might not. So let me tell you the story. National Statistical Survey, this is a Government of India body. So this is, I think, there are questions on quality and all. I'm not getting into that, but this is the only body, like, very interesting on this. This is a nationally representative survey, including a sample of more than 100,000 households, comprising 64,000 rural households and urban households, some 50,000 urban households, enumerating more than 500,000 individuals. So this is a large data set. This is the first NSS round. The 75th round is the first NSS round to provide information on preschooling in India. There is no other NSS round before this that gives any information on preschools. They start getting information on from grade 1. So this is very, very clear, including the household expenditure that I am going to talk for the children who are attending pre-primary school. Their access, their investment also. It is specifically asked about children's enrollment status in nursery and kindergarten in each household. Children accessing Anganwadi centers under ICDS, as I said, are not part of this survey. So this is a caveat of the survey I should mention. Children between the age of 3 to 5 years who are enrolled in Anganwadi centers are recorded as not enrolled in the pre-primary education. If they are in Anganwadis and all, they are not enrolled in this particular data set. But I am getting into other data sets where Anganwadi stories will come up. But this is not Anganwadi centers because this data doesn't collect, this only collect information who are enrolled in nursery and kindergarten, because that is the question that is being asked here. So this should be very, very clear. Here I have taken 3 to 5 years, but sometimes I have used 3 to 6 years also for early childhood education. Why? Because Government of India changed its norm in the last year only, that children who are in the age of 6, they are allowed to enroll in grade 1. Earlier, before last year, it was 5. So if you are in grade 5, then you will be enrolled in grade 5. So before 5, you will be getting into preschools. Now from 3 to 6, you are getting into preschools. Because only after passing age 6, you will be enrolled in grade 1. So for ASER data, for instance, I have used 3 to 6 because that came in 2022. So that's the. What we have done here, we have restricted the data for individuals surveyed in the age group of 3 to 5 years, the official age group for accessing pre-primary at that point of time when the survey was conducted, giving us a sample of around almost 20,000 children in this survey. If you see this is a very interesting picture of this data set. Percentage share of children aged 3 to 5 years attending pre-primary, primary or no schools. So by age-wise 3, 4, 5 years and total also being given. If you see pre-primary grade, it is being asked nursery and kindergarten. 20% of the total children are attending either nursery or kindergarten. Primary and all I am not focusing because many are out of formal schools because they are in them and in Anganwadis and all other places. So as I said, so only 20%. So this is very, very clear. With the increase in age, you will find that more children are getting into nursery and kindergarten. Because the provisioning of schools sometimes happens that they take little older children, not younger children. The other data set I am using is India Human Development Survey, ISDS data. ISDS is again a nationally representative multi-topic survey, very interesting data set. I think many of you know. Many individuals with almost 42,000 households covering many villages and many urban neighborhoods. So this is a very interesting data set, and this is being collected in 2004-05 also, which is a panel data. Some individuals, almost 83% of the individuals and the households are covered in the next round. Some individuals is being tracked. It collects learning outcomes, reading, writing, and math assessment status of children aged 18 to 11 years only. Their reading, math, and writing skills are being assessed. There is a separate village level questionnaire which provides information on the availability of early childhood or preschool education, including Anganwadi centers in the village. Whether there is access to Anganwadis or preschools in that village, that is being asked in this particular survey. We have considered only those children who are aged 8 to 11 years in 2011-12 and resided in rural India, for whom access to early childhood education data is available. Let me clarify. Early childhood education is 3 to 5, but the 3 to 5 learning outcome is not available in this data set. 8 to 11 years data learning outcome is available. What I did, I got the learning outcome of 8 to 11. I matched that with the children who living in villages. So if that village had this early specific early childhood education provisions, that impact on lateral learning, like 8 to 11 years learning. So that's the kind of analysis I did, because we don't have the other way around. The other one I did with ASER data that I will come, matching with like lower level, like learning outcome of lower grade children. That I did through ASER, but here I did like this. And this is only rural India because the village level questionnaire only captures information from rural India, that whether, particularly in rural village, whether EC facility is available or not. So using this data set, we examine the association between the availability of early childhood education provisions in the village and children's learning outcome in reading, writing, and math. The last data set is annual status of education report. ASER 2022 is a nationwide, again, household-based survey on children's schooling and learning status in the age group of 3 to 16 years in rural India only. This is a rural India survey. ASER Center is Pratham's Autonomous Research and Assessment Unit. Pratham is an international organization. So one part is, they do many things, but ASER is one among them. Schooling status is recorded for children in the age group of 3 to 16. And children in the age group of 5 to 16 are tested for their ability to read simple text and do basic arithmetic. So the learning outcome is not for 3, 4, only starts from 5, because they explain that it's not good to assess the learning level of children in the very early age. That is their logic, 3 and 4. So they started estimating their, like, getting the learning outcome, testing them at the age of 5 until 16. So what I have done, when I analyzed or connected early childhood education with learning outcome, I took the children 5 and 6. The basic learning levels are captured as order categorical variables. For example, for reading score, they have said it is a beginner, can read a letter, can read a word, can read a paragraph, can read a story. So it is a higher. Similarly, for math, you can, I have not given for everything, but in math, they have said, okay, can you recognize a number? Can you do simple addition? Can you do simple division and all that? See, this survey was conducted every year for 10 years, from 2005 to 14. Thereafter, an alternate year cycle was introduced by ASER. The latest data available is 2022, which is used for this study. When I am saying there is an alternative year, because in the alternative year, they specifically focused on some issues. For example, in some years, they looked at early childhood education specifically. Some years, they looked at the COVID-19 impact and all that they did. But this is the main data set that they are going to use. ASER 2022 employs a two-stage cluster design. In the first stage, 30 villages are sampled from the census of 2011 village directory for each district using probability proportional to size sampling method. In the second stage, 20 households with resident children are surveyed in each sampled village, giving a sample size of 600 households per district, which is a good number and also very representative. In 2022, if you see the figure, there are more than 374,000 households from 19,000 villages, total sample of around 697, more than 697,000 children in the age group of 3 to 16, which is a huge number. And it is very random as well as very representative. The preschool enrollment status captures the enrollment in Anganwadis. Here they capture everything. LKG, UKG, nursery. There is something called Balwadi also. That again, the kind of pre-primary school. Separately. Data are also collected on school type, government, private, even within the pre-primary school. That gives very interesting idea to explore the story. We have restricted our sample to 3 to 6 here, as I said, to examine the inequality in access to preschools, kind of preschools, It's not only access, it's also kind of preschools they go. And for measuring its association with learning outcome, the data is restricted for learning outcome. We have restricted the data for 5 to 6 because the data for learning outcome is not available for 3 and 4. That's very, very clear. Let us get into some descriptive evidence, then I will go to my empirical analysis. Before getting into this, India is huge, not necessarily in population, but geographically also. We have so many states, UTs, and all that. I'm not getting into language, but there are many. So if you see, this is the NSS. I am using now 3 sources. So please see which source is that is mentioned in each of the slides. I am using NSS 2020 because this is 17-18, but the data released in 2020. So the source is 2020. Next one is about 11-12 ISDS data. The third one is ASSOT 2022. So I have mentioned which figure comes from where. So that's very, very clear. So this is when I say this is not including Anganwadis. So this may be very less, the share of EC participation, which is 20%, the red one at all India level. But you see this, there is a huge difference across states. Odisha, in fact, this is my state. This is only 7% early childhood education from where I belong. But here in Goa, it is 57%. And some rich states, educationally and economically, Kerala, Punjab, I'm not trying to give you a sense of each state because they are very different from each other. So I can say these are rich states, some of them very rich educationally as well as economically. There the EC participation you see very high. And here you the bottom Bihar, Odisha, but there are some exceptions like Karnataka. Karnataka having a good, like they are economically also better off. Sometimes they are better off in education also, but there the EC participation is very low. So it's important to understand the regional dynamics of EC. That is one important idea that I have explored a bit, but more needs to be explored on the regional dynamics of early childhood education. Yeah. So if this is including Anganwadis, that is excluding Anganwadis, that I mentioned also very clearly. Here, if you see India's picture increases, if you include Anganwadis, almost 58% children are participating in early childhood education. If you include that, increases a lot. But there also you find differences, not that significant, but there is variations. If you see the states like 4 states like Rajasthan, even Uttar Pradesh, they are participating, there the participation is very low, but at the top are Maharashtra. Here, Karnataka, if you see the Anganwadis, if you include Anganwadis, Karnataka is at the other side. But it was the left side when you exclude Anganwadis. You see the dynamics. So Anganwadi makes the presence of Anganwadi makes brings a different story altogether. So that is an interesting thing to look at. If you see this is again from the excluding Anganwadis. If you see the NSSO data, I have included many things, but I want to highlight a few of them. One important thing is about consumption quintile. This is the economic status. Because NSS doesn't collect the data on income. It collects how much expenditure you do, family expenditure. So that I have divided into 5 different groups. Q1 being the poorest, Q5 being the richest. If you see, let's see the total one. Only almost 11% from poorest quintile are attending pre-primary. But if you see that, it is more than 40% from richest. So you see huge difference. Similarly, by household head education status, if the lowest illiterate 12%, it goes to 38% for richest, graduation and above, if the household head education. We have the religion-wise difference, we have caste-wise difference. I have to say something about caste because we have scheduled tribes, STs, scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, other backward classes, and general. So scheduled tribe are the lower hierarchy, and the general is the higher in the caste group because there is a social status to it. So that is very, very clear casting. And this is very old. I am not getting into that debate very much, but there is a hierarchy and there is differences. Though we don't find much differences by gender, male and female, we don't find much differences. As we saw in that global picture also, gender inequality is there, but here also we find gender inequality with small variations between female and male. This goes with the global idea, global picture. If you see this between government and private, this is very, very clear. I have included Anganwadi also in government in that sense because also that is from women and child development. I also analyzed through government separately Anganwadi, but here I am showing you to make the picture clear. EC enrollment by school type, if you see, including Anganwadis, there is a difference. And over age, if you see, with the increase in age, more are getting into private. You see, here it is more private than government. So it's very, very clear because private sector is intervening a lot in the latter part when the children are in the 5, 6 and all. And there is a clear market for that. I hope I will give an explanation to that in my analysis in the later stage. It's not only about access, because access matters, but how much they invest, how much households spend on their children's pre-primary education. This is per child per annum on pre-primary education, excluding Anganwadis. Because Anganwadis, if you go, you don't pay anything. So this is excluding Anganwadis. If you say this is the data from National Sample Survey, you can see a huge variation. Just see this also. What I did, interestingly, I have converted this into dollar terms with the rate that was there in 2017-18 when the the survey was conducted. It was almost 70 per like $1 was ₹70. So in that way, I converted for an international audience. So if you see very clearly, this is the all India level picture. There is a clear differences in spending. I can say between the quintile groups, $42 per annum. People send if they want to send one child per year to pre-primary. And it goes to 90. Almost how many times? I would say it is almost 7 times. So it is 7 times more the people from richer quintile they spend on early childhood education. And that's the point that I want to highlight, that they are the people who are sending their kids to elite private schools. And there you get a huge investment. Similarly, you get difference between rural and urban. In rural area, they spend only 77. Here it is very huge. Maybe the cost differences that comes up. So there it's not about only access, it's also about their investment. This is very interesting, the last column. This is here to total household consumption expenditure, because this gives a proportional, very, sensical value, that how much they spend out of their total household expenditure. That means I divided the expenditure, household expenditure on pre-primary with the total household expenditure on all items. So if you see in overall, if you see this 6.2, that means if one family is sending one child to pre-primary or early childhood, that family needs to spend 6% of its income, you can say, or consumption expenditure, whatever. So that's the kind of story that is saying. And that also again differs significantly with socioeconomic differences. There is also huge state-specific differences in household investment. It's not only that's the all India picture. Here also with differences. You see some poorest states, Chandigarh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Assam, Bihar, they are spending at the bottom. Their expenditure on early childhood. You see Punjab, 184 USD per child per annum. There is a huge differences, and this is the state where highest privatization is there in early childhood and all school levels. I work on other school education also, other levels of schooling, like in primary and upper primary, even in secondary. This is a state where highest private participation in school education.
So this is public and private expenditure total? Or?
This is only household expenditure. This is only household spending. Yeah, because children attending to any public schools, any Anganwadi, they don't need to spend anything. Rather, they get something from the schools. Midday meal, eggs, and many others. That is the thing. But very interestingly, I must mention, as Hitesh told here, we have Right to Education Act 2009 we got, but it doesn't include pre-primary. There is a hue and cry on this. Advocacy was there, but still it is not. This policy 2020 is trying to do that, but not so far. So our fundamental right to education, which is again from age 6 to 14, grade 1 to grade 8, not below grade 1. Okay, let me go ahead. So what are the major takeaways from these descriptive figures? There is a significant regional inequality, rural-urban, including state-specific, and also socioeconomic inequality in access to early childhood education. And children belonging to historically disadvantaged social group. I said it historically disadvantaged because caste is there. And poor families are at the bottom. You see in all the places, investment as well as access. There is a significant state-wise variations in early childhood education. I said it very clearly, both overall and also in rural India. For instance, 40% in Rajasthan, including Anganwadi, 73% in Maharashtra. That is excluding Anganwadis. Here, 7%, including. Here, 7% in Odisha, 57% in Goa. So there is a huge difference in early childhood education participation across states. There is considerable socioeconomic inequality in the household investment, as I said. I take household investment as a, what you call, indicator or the proxy, I should say, on quality. Because that actually gives you better access to early childhood education, better quality access to early childhood education. If you have money, you can buy more, better quality. So it's almost like a market. Private provisioning is rapidly expanding in India. This is very, very clear, the message. Including rural India. This is the story. So far, it was not in rural India. So now it is getting into rural India. So people like investors who are in education. Education is a for-profit business in India that is spread. And they are now looking, rural India is the market for them. Because they are almost optimized at the stagnant stage in rural urban India. So they are catering to rural India where 60% of the Indians are living. Sorry. Rich and educated households are more likely to have access to these schools. That is very, very clear. Let me get into analysis, empirical. Two major analyses I have done. One is choice for preschools. Second one is how early childhood participation impacts children's learning outcome. Let me get into the preschool choice. Who participates in preschools? This is excluding Anganwadi centers. The NSS data. So if you see, I have done much, but I don't want to explain everything. If there will be this, the picture is very clear. To some extent, if you see, this is the reference category is female. So male are more likely to some extent. If you see this, this is the average marginal effect. This is the odds ratio logic model. Here I have done with interaction terms with the urban household with the interaction term I included. So this is very, very clear. Rich people are more. Like upper caste, if you see, they are more likely to get into early childhood education. The coefficient is higher than them. So all that happens, household education, family size, all that if you see socioeconomic, it is very, very clear. This is more clear. What I did, I estimated predicted probabilities of attending preschools by location and household head. You can see this, here rural urban lines, here household head education, here probability of attending pre-primary. So if with the increase in household head education, everything else remain constant, there is an increasing trend of early childhood education participation. And this gap declines at the higher level of household head education. So the gap is so high between rural and urban at the bottom, this level, with low level of household education. So that means a child who is belong to rural area with less education level of the household head, double disadvantage. Similarly, if you see this with household consumption expenditure, which is economic status, here probability of attending, again rural urban, the gap actually widens a lot in this portion and then it declines. So this is very, very. Poor children, there is not much because they are anyways, there is not much difference between urban poor and rural poor. So that is not giving much difference. But once you are into the middle income, and this is the widening gap between rural urban and high income, it is all reducing a bit. This is from ASHA data. Predictors of children's preschool choice in rural India. I examined this differently for government and private. And the reference category is Anganwadis. And if you have private school in village, it is not significant here. But if you have a private school in village, there is a high likely that you are attending. This is the marginal effect. So there is a high likely that you are attending to private preschools. Similarly, we have medium of instruction effect is there. If you, by age wise, we have got this. So 6-year-old reference is 5. Then we have gender wise. We have father's years of schooling, mother's years of schooling, village level indicators I have controlled. So you can see there is also socioeconomic inequality in this. And that difference is clear for government and as well as private in relation to Anganwadis. But this matters a lot for private. You can see very, very clearly. So let us get into participation and children's learning outcome. This is from ISDS very clearly. So initially I started looking at, okay, if there is early childhood education facilities in the village, what is happening? Here the facility is not there. Here the facility is there in the village. No and yes. Here in the reading score, math score and writing score. I have taken only the two. There are many ways it is being the categorical order variable, lowest outcome and highest outcome. There are also in between outcomes in the reading, math score and the writing score. Hope I am clear. For instance, in reading score, you can read a letter, that is number 1. You can read a word, that is number 2. You can read a para, story and all. I have taken the lowest one, reading a letter to reading the story. So for highest to lowest. So that would give a better picture, I thought. So if you see, If there is a preschool education access, you can say the effect is higher, very, very clearly. And here also, the effect is very, very clearly coming off. This should be very clearly understood. Because at the lower level, the effect should be less. Because this is negative. You please understand. This is the highest outcome, it should be higher. For all highest outcomes, if there is a access to early childhood education facility, the coefficient is higher than this. 0.29, 0.33. But for lowest, it is less. 15, this is 12. Then because this is lowest, this is highest. So you should understand this in that way, the coefficients. So all highest outcome, the presence of pre-primary schools, presence of any early childhood education facility gives a better coefficient. Unit is individual level we did, child level. So child level, but we got the information at the village level. Like if there are 10 children in one village, for all children, the yes is yes. Like they have access to early childhood education. No, these are the marginal effects. So I did a logit estimations, like order logit. So there I took the independent, the dependent variable is their learning outcome, and independent variable are many socioeconomic factors that I included. Then I try to understand the presence of a preschool in the village. So that's the main idea. Yeah, the learning outcome is 8 to 11, very clear. But the presence of preschool or not? That is not possible. That is not possible. Or I think if you look at the 2004-5, we can see their age and then, but in 2004-5, they say 8 to 11 will be very less, like 0 years almost, 0 year, 1 years. They may not be accessing those. So that was my initial attempt to look at. But what I found in the later stage, if I can remember, in later stage, I found that children level, individual level, learning outcome is not available in ISDS for early childhood list, particularly this is early years of learning outcome. So only the learning outcome is available for 8 to 11. So then I thought, okay, let us discuss this, the children. And I am assuming here that the children who are in 8 to 11 in 2011-12, they might have presence in that and they might have attended the preschools that time. So that's the kind of assumption I made here. I'm not sure how far that is true, but yeah. Averages I estimated, but it would confuse, I thought, giving all, like for math, I will have 4 lines, for math, reading 4 lines. So I thought, let me show you learning lowest and highest, but I would be happy to share the other one if you need, like other. I estimated for all levels. But for my presentation, I kept this. I did a logic estimate, marginal effect I calculated. See, this is from Aisha. Children's preschool education and learning outcome during early childhood. So here, what I did, the children for 5 to 6, because the learning outcome for 3 to 4 is not available in Assam. So here it is children from 5 to 6, and they are learning out, they are access to early childhood education. You can see for reading levels, math levels, English also, they collected for 3, reading, math, and English. I estimated for this. Again, I took the 2 highest and lowest. One is can read a letter, can read word. Can recognize digital number, can recognize 2-digit number, can read capital letters, can read small letters. So some of the differences I found. And if you see, they're always, here Anganwadi is the reference in this case, if you see the type of preschools and their effect, private is highest. The children who are accessing private preschools, their marginal effect is very high in comparison to government, and anyway it is in comparison to Anganwadis. So they are the people who are learning better. Because they're investing a lot, they're getting better exposure. The story is very clear. In Anganwadis, one important understanding, there is also very interesting research that in Anganwadi centers, teaching learning for children doesn't happen much. There the things are very different. Children go, they get some meals, something like kind of morning food and all that, which are equally important. I'm not saying those are important for child's cognitive development, which Aisha's work tells a lot. But I am telling you that the kind of preschools that is being given in pre-primary schools in private sector is not the way that Anganwadi is doing. So that may be the difference, that when we measure that impact on learning outcome, these things comes up very clearly. This is, yeah.
So here you're not including kids in places that don't have any of these kinds of preschools?
That is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that means the children not getting any of these. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. So that would have been one, but here what I did, this is, I was trying to understand, I'm just taking some time to think. We have learning outcomes for them also. Learning outcomes.
These are just the children that accessed.
So just the children, but he's asking if you can make, instead of 3, why not making it 4, Anganwadi, government, private, and the reference may be none of these. And then who are not at all getting to any, what is their impact? So that may be one. I think that is a very interesting, great point. I look into it. So there are other things are coming up. I have not highlighted much. So anyway, you know that mother schooling methods and all that. So we have also controlled for household indicators, village level indicators, and many other. This is very interesting. This is a summary of what we do. Differential access to early childhood education and children's reading level. I estimated the predicted probabilities. Mother years of schooling, that is important factor. Even at the international level, this is being recognized. If you see predicted probability of children's reading letters and reading word, in both the cases, the private is at the top, private KG, government KG at the middle, and Anganwadi at the lowest. And here also, again, we can get a line of nothing, as I think Ariel told. Here also in 3 lines, it is there. And not, there are some differences in the gaps, but it exists. If you see these, for math level also, similar picture exists. 3, there is a significant gap. So that matters like what, it's not about only access to early childhood education, what kind of early childhood education you are accessing that has differential impact on learning outcome. The message is loud and clear. Here also, if you see English level, the picture is also more or less. What are the key takeaways from this analysis, the empirical part? Let me get into one. Individual and household factors emerging as significant in determining preschool attendance and learning outcome. Establishing a vicious cycle of inequalities in educational opportunities. Children, like households who are poor, living in rural areas, from first generation learners, their inequalities will continue because at the beginning they are disadvantaged. And it is very, very serious and having a clear policy significance. We must get into this discourse. That's the reason this gave me an immense interest to analyze. A substantial portion of the rural-urban gap in access to early childhood education can be removed by controls for household economic condition and head education status. So if you control for economic status of the household and their education level, you will not find much difference between rural and urban areas. Because now many are getting into rural areas also. You will find private preschools, but they are not being accessed by many. Particularly, they are accessed only by elites, rural elites. So that's the story. Access to EC considerably impacts children's learning outcome. Very, very clear, the loud and clear the message. Math, reading, writing, and English in rural India. Overall in rural India. Children accessing private preschools have higher learning outcome than the children accessing Anganwadis and other government preschools. So there is a hierarchy. First is private, second government, then Anganwadis. Then what areas should maybe the none of these, which I have not examined. I will include that. A child accessing private preschools from an educated mother, for instance, benefits the most compared to one attending Anganwadis with an illiterate mother. Or maybe none of these. So I am comparing within 3 different types. So if you are from an illiterate mother, your mother is illiterate, you are attending Anganwadis, you may not learn anything of that kind. But if your mother is educated, you are attending a private preschool, you are at the top. So that's the kind of inequalities that is happening in the Indian early childhood education market. Yeah.
So, do you have any kind of comparison?
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting story. I have not done so far this, but this is an interesting, great point I will look at. If illiterate mother but attending private, what benefit they are getting, the interactions. I did so much of interactions, I did not include them, some of them, but I will look at that, yes. Yeah, that is very important. And I have some points on that. So access to, thank you for this. Access to different type of preschools vary considerably across states also. And this is a regional dynamics that must be understood very clearly. Because I am giving an all India picture with some hints to regional dynamics. But it's important to get into the regional dynamics in detail. This has a strong association with children's learning outcome. For instance, a considerable difference exists in children's learning between Punjab and Odisha. I saw that also by across states also. I looked at the learning inequality and it is very clear. What are the policy implications? There are many, but I will say a few. Inequalities in early childhood education are too serious to ignore because it produces and reproduces the vicious cycle of inequalities in India. The message is loud and clear. So it is too serious to ignore anymore in a country like India where 25% of the children, world's children in the age group of 0 to 6 are lying. Introduction to preschool sector in primary schools to increase access. This is most, which is being said in the NEP. Government must clarify the position of Anganwadis. This is not clear. They are always confusing parents that anyway they are saying you are accessing early childhood education. What kind of early childhood education my child is accessing if my child is getting into Anganwadi centers? Is it something happening there? I am not undermining their role in other fields. I am saying is my child is getting any learning from that. If not, then why you are confusing or saying that we have given the provisioning of early childhood education in villages? So that must be clear from the government. I think there is some attempt, but I went to some field surveys in Delhi particularly and Odisha. I found a different story. There is always a confusing story between schools and Anganwadis. Because now an attempt is made to merge Anganwadis with schools. But they are not ready. Anganwadi centers, they are not ready because they are saying we will be in danger. We are not teachers. Why you are involving in schools? We are different. So all that, even the ministry differs. The school is in Ministry of Education, Anganwadi centers in Ministry of Women and Child Development. There is a class. So all that happening. There are interesting stories I got from my field surveys also, which I have not included here. Other one is merely improving access to early childhood education is not enough. The message is clear. Quality early childhood education is need of the hour. An emerging priority. This is an emerging priority to improve the quality. No one needs to see a situation like compulsory schooling in India. I have given an analogy here. Because compulsory schooling in India has happened. All children are enrolled in schools. But what kind of schools? If you see the kind of public schools, they are deteriorating. All children are running towards private schools. So you have existing primary schools, but nobody is there. The classrooms are empty. Many primary schools, public primary schools are shutting down. Thousands of primary schools are not getting children. The teachers are now paid without children. So teachers are being transferred to other schools. And some schools are being shut down. Like they are either merged or they are completely closed. So we don't want to see a similar story. Okay, we have early childhood education by government, but nobody wants those kind of early childhood education. Because there is nothing. No teachers, no teaching, learning happening and all. We want a real quality provisioning of early childhood education from public or government. Public spending on early childhood education must go up. This is one of the lowest. NEP recommends a substantial increase in public investment in education, including early childhood education. This is the recommendation. EC is placed as a key long-term thrust areas of public funding in NEP. But NEP has come in the last 3 years. We don't see any increase in investment, public investment in education. Rather, it is stagnant or declining, the data is saying. So last 3 years, they are implementing. What Government of India is trying to do, Government of India is implementing which are easy to implement. For instance, they scrapped the MPhil program. The day the NEP was adopted, the next day, notice came to all universities that no MPhil will work because the NEP has suggested. But NEP has suggested several other things. We have a research program called MPhil, Masters in Philosophy, before PhD. Some people go for MPhil programs before getting into PhD. I don't think in USA there is MPhil. But in that context, that was benefiting the marginalized children, like students, who are not ready for after graduation or masters to PhD, but that was scrapped overnight because that was suggested by NEP. But NEP has suggested for public funding, where is that? NEP has suggested several other things, where is that? So that's the important thing one should understand. Regulation of private provisioning of BC, this is increasing as I said, and it is rapidly increasing. So it is important to regulate them. NEP suggests light but tight regulation. This is the phrase I have got from them. This is light but tight. But what is light? What is tight? It needs to be understood very, very clearly. Regulatory policy for the private sector, including early childhood education. How much light, how much tight? That is not so far it is clear in the policy document. But they say it is light but as I see, because I intensively work on private sector, because one of the important areas that I look at how private sector intervention is changing the education story, including social mobility, including family investment. So that is one important story I explore always. So there I have seen the private sector participation in medical education is increasing rapidly, even in the last 3 years. In engineering education, it increased a lot. It is almost saturated. Now, forcefully, they are not there because nobody is going to their colleges. So many engineering colleges are shutting down. I think Asutosh and me, with Prashant, we did a study. We found very clearly what students are learning from engineering. They are almost learning nothing in the 4 years of program in many parts of many institutions in the country. So stories are very, very clear. So that needs, but it is unclear to many about the regulation of private sector in Indian education. I think I must. Creating new evidence. This is my one important finding after looking at all data. We need new evidence and data for getting a better picture for early childhood. We don't have enough information. The information I am giving, some questions that are coming, I am not able to address some of them because we don't have data. So there should be a comprehensive survey on early childhood education before getting into this policy. I must suggest this. Let me get into my last slide. What we can do further? We can do many things, but I am telling you a few. What are the parental aspirations and strategies for the early human capital formulation through early childhood education for their children and thereby their investment decisions? Not clear. How parents think? Parents are thinking in India. Rural parents, urban parents, parents from low socioeconomic backgrounds, their aspirations, their strategies. Nobody knows. We have not talked about to parents what they think. To what extent are variations in the quality early childhood education is understood by the parents of different socioeconomic backgrounds? Somebody is sending to elite, somebody is sending to Anganwadi, somebody is sending to government preschools. How they understand quality? Do they understand clearly the market? How do they understand the returns to early childhood education as evident in the literature? We are saying that the return is very high at the global level. But have the parents have understood? I don't know. There is nothing have come up very clearly. To what extent do they link it with later life opportunity? Do they really think a long-term provisioning of connecting early childhood education with later part of their life? I am not sure whether they have understood. What is the extent of heterogeneity in quality of early childhood education? There is a huge heterogeneity. Who teaches in preschools? Nobody knows. In private preschools, what are the teacher qualifications? Is there any teacher training for pre-primary school teachers? What is taught to the children? This is a black box. Deepen and I visited at least a couple of pre-primary schools in India, including Anganwadis. Sometimes I talk to the children. They told the little children, they told something is repetitive. I listened the same story 10 times. I am not interested because the Anganwadi workers, they have something kind of, sometimes they come up with very less kind of some small stories. They keep telling the same children, same story. The pre-primary schools in the private, what they are doing, nobody knows. What is their curriculum? Nobody. Now the curriculum framework have come up. After, I would say, 75 years of independence. I'm removing the pre-independence. I'm getting into the post-colonial stage. So there, we don't have anything that what children should be taught. The private schools are independent of teaching, what they are teaching. We have some curriculum framework from grade 1. Not some, they're robust, I would say, the NCR. How do private providers understand parents' aspirations? This is from market side. And preferences for EC in India. What is their strategy to meet parental demand for EC? Because they are also strategizing. The market is strategizing. There is a capital. Like capitalists, they are there to invest in early childhood education. So how there, this is one thing is how parents understand the market. The other thing is how understand the market understand the parents. Accordingly, they are strategizing. That is also equally important. Thank you so much for everyone. I will be happy to respond whatever comes to me, if I can. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes.
Oh, sorry, I consumed a lot.
No, it's a huge landscape.
Yeah,
and I think you did a great job in trying to give us a kind of overall picture of that landscape. And I mean, maybe just to start us off, you've talked about access and variation in options of access to early childhood education, but quality isn't available in terms of indicators of quality. So if you were to say what 2 or 3 things we should be collecting data on to give us an understanding of quality, because even in private preschools, there's going to be a huge variation. What would that look like? What would you recommend collecting?
Very interesting point. I need to think, but for the time being, I would say the teacher's qualifications in preschools, because teacher is an important indicator for quality. I would say, who are the teachers? Some indicators on teachers, because for primary education, we have some indicators. We have a UDICE data, Unified District Information on School Education. They collect infrastructure facilities, they collect teachers, but not in preschool. Recently, they included preschools, but again, that is very hotspots. They have said this very clearly. One is about teachers indicators, that is one. Second one is infrastructure. Also, we don't have much, because for early people like children, to teach children from early years, you need a different setting altogether. You cannot enter them to the schools kind of access to the schools, grade 1. So for them, something else is needed. So that is also another thing. A macro other indicator I must say is about public spending on early childhood education. Where is public spending on early childhood education? All data I looked, starting from primary. How much government spends on primary, how much government spends on secondary, how much government on college, university, and all that. Data is there. I have analyzed that. But nothing on pre-primary because that was not the focus. Even government doesn't know how much it spends. Does it? Even Anganwadi spending also no more available. Like it's not there. So they don't record anything on pre-primary. Now the focus has come. At least now onwards, we should get some information of how much public investment is made on early childhood education. So teachers, infrastructure, public investment, these are some of the indicators that we look at. And the other one I don't know, I also don't know how to do, is about pedagogy. What is being taught? If primary schools are doing that, is it that they are teaching very differently to the children than private government preschools or Anganwadis? Anganwadis anyway, they are not teaching much. But at least to compare with government preschools, are they teaching very differently? Their curriculum is very different. Their pedagogy is very different. They have brilliant teachers. Is it that? Nobody knows. So these are some of the things to measure quality. Why some are doing better, some are not doing better. So that way we should look at it. But I can think more also.
Yeah. The floor open to others.
I think what I was really struck by in the presentation is about how there's all this government spending and involvement, and there's the government structure, and then there's the private, and then there's the Anganwadis, and there's like these different types of organizations and ecosystems that are sort of all working in this area. Based on your research and like kind of like almost like a vision for what the future landscape of early child education should look like, right? To like think about things like quality, standardization, measurement. Should it all be under the government, right? Like it's like 100% public provision of early child education, the vision, or is there a role for these sort of private and non-state actors? Yeah.
So I will respond one by one, and I will take a couple.
Maybe we'll take a couple and then.
Yeah, I just want to ask you something. So a lot of things that we look at for pre-primary first need to be very similar to primary education earlier, be it with respect to the learning outcomes in private versus public, or the lack of information asymmetry amongst parents and other stakeholders about what is the importance of private. So instead of reinventing everything else, can we simply not leap from a little and say, okay, from a polynomial point of view, introduce a voucher system perhaps to, between public and private schools and see which one works better? And there has been research that that's worked better in primary. And similarly, we have research to say that informational campaigns give the highest returns in terms of like learning adjusted years for schooling for primary education. So can same thing apply in a pre-primary context, or would there be some contextualized difference?
Yeah. Initially, you drew a comparison, a relationship between mother's education and enrollment in early childhood education. But I just feel a better scale would be influence of mother in family decision making and enrollment in early childhood education.
Actually, building off of what she was mentioning, I was just wondering the correlation between mother's education and socioeconomic status, and how heavily are they correlated, in the sense that if we control for socioeconomic status, how much effect does mother end up having still on the kids wherever the kid chooses to go? Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe you could take those and then see for some.
Very interesting questions. Thank you. Great questions. This is a very big question for me, because I am still understanding the story, like early childhood education. Because you are asking me to give a landscape, what should be done, what should not be. I'm not at that position to respond very concretely, but I would say a few points. One is there is an increasing presence of the private sector at every levels of education, including early childhood education. It is more so in early childhood education. And we see the stories like this. Once the public, like government fails in giving quality education, the private sector gets it. So because always there is a huge demand for human capital building across states, across socioeconomic groups, that all parents' needs that their child should learn well. There should be a future, they should lead a better life in future, I would say. So for that, if they are seeing that, okay, my child is accessing something, but like government schools, but not learning anything, so let me compromise. There are stories that sells, they compromise their health expenditure. They compromise their food expenditure to some extent to send their child to a better school. So to that level, there is a demand. What I would say, the kind of landscape we have, the socioeconomic landscape in India, including the caste story, I would say let government invest a lot on pre-primary education. The Anganwadi centers are also demanded. It's not that they are empty. If children go from rural areas and they access Anganwadis, they get food, they enjoy for a moment, they come back, and that helps them. If you open up good pre-primary schools in villages, there will be, I would assure you that there will be children and they will learn. You give them good teacher and you give them good facilities, they will there, and that will help the country to reach any level. One of them is reaching 5 trillion economy, which is our country is aspiring for. One, I said, being an economist. So that will help all kinds of. So I must recommend that. Other one is, as the private sector has come up very rapidly, it's very difficult to control. But one thing I listened from my engineering story, Asutosh, I must mention, that if you don't demand for them, they will automatically vanish. Because engineering institutions are coming down a lot, the private number is declining because they are empty. Nobody is like, no, I'm not saying everyone. I'm saying many of them are empty. They are being converted into supermarkets. They are being converted into gymnasiums because they are not getting enough money to run the business. So they are so. So this is a good response to the private. So what is the, because we have good IITs. The first preference is in Indian Institute of Technology. We have many government engineering colleges. All are dying to go there. You can't imagine the applicant to seat ratio. It is 1,000 million times you can imagine. So that way, why not strengthening a good early childhood education? If you want to strengthen Anganwadis, strengthen. If you want to open pre-primary sections, you do that. Try to not bring the private sector at least in the early level. Like, I don't know what my child is going to do, but I want to invest a lot on privates. That is not a good policy, I would say. I strongly recommend for good public investment on early childhood education, opening of good preschools, that would really help us a lot. Really, really help us. Because now in the primary schools also, we have many kinds of primary schools. We have something called Kendriya Vidyalayas. We call them central schools. They are managed by central government. They are good. They are being demanded because we got good schools, good infrastructure, good teachers. They are also government, but they are demanded because they are giving good quality education. So there is a difference within government schools also. I strongly recommend for that. I never go for going for privatization. This is one. The other one is voucher. I think that is a little, I study a lot on that, but I am little afraid about this system because we had some understanding of that in the context of Karnataka a long time ago. And that did not work because one important reason for this is information asymmetry. Parents are not understanding the education market well. So it's not an advanced society like the place we are sitting, US, the most advanced in the world. So here parents understand schools. They understand where it is learning is happening, where learning is not happening. But in India, we don't know parents. That's the reason one in the future research I mentioned about parents understanding. Parents are very clueless on many things. If you want to give them some voucher, and they may take wrong decisions. So nobody is there to help them saying that, okay, peer groups are also, because if you are poor, you are connected with poor peer groups. That's the society. That's the way we are heading. So if I am rich, I am connected to rich. Poor connected to rich is very rare. So that's the way. If you are poor, like your understanding is poor and you are connected socially where the understanding is poor, then who will help you to understand the idea? So it will not be a good idea for. Then I will take care of those, like looking at this. But when I looked at mother's education, I controlled others. But it would be interesting to understand the mechanisms through which mother's education is working. One is empowerment. That is one important. As educated mothers, one important mechanism is they take good decisions at the household level. I have done some studies that from IHDS data that tells that mother's education impacts a lot on children's education decision. All other decisions, including education decision, where to study. Like mothers, like educated mother, they send their children, more likely that they are sending their children to private schools because they understand, they take a decision, even they on their investment decision also. So working mother, educated, the top, then even housewife, educated, they are taking a good decision on children. So it happens through decisions. So that's what, yeah, thank you.
Just one more round of questions.
Yeah.
So I was going to start there.
Please. Yeah.
My question is really, sorry, I'm a sociologist, so but it's really good. My question is, so when we talk about early child education, if we don't have the what to teach and just focus on the infrastructure and those things, what does it mean? What does it mean, like early education, early child education? Is there a kind of a very good example of a country with this kind of idea which accomplish this concept? And if that's the case, like how can we essentialize this early education for its citizens' success?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah, just a quick question. I want to follow up the person who asked about the mother's education. Do you see any correlation between the father's education and whether a kid goes to preschool? Because there's definitely families like where like the mother's not educated, but the dad or husband's a physician, a lawyer, right? In India, that's common.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll go. You haven't asked yet.
In India, the education sector is in the education is in the states. So the state governments they exist in education. So what are the reasons why probably early childhood education has as you said that the vacancy in early Anganwadi centers is probably because of a fascination with English language. Because the state government, they, as far as I know, none of the states they have teaching in the English medium. And of late, parents, even if they belong to the lowest part of the society, they would want their children to study English medium. That's the reason why a lot of Anganwadi centers are vacant, and people, even who are very poor, are investing whatever, like diverting their income and making their children go to private schools where say government sector, the teachers are more qualified as compared to the private sector. So how do you see education sector?
Very interesting.
I just had, do you have any correlation between like, do they prioritize early childhood education for boys or girls? See the trend.
So I just want to add to the question. Thank you. It was a really interesting presentation. So I work in a public health research organization in India. And I was actually shocked by what you showed, that the private sector kids are doing better. Because my, understanding on the ground is private preschools are really ghastly. So the fact that these children seem to be doing better is kind of miraculous. To me, because at least, and I will say that I've looked at Goa and I've looked at Haryana. And Goa, the schools are really, really much better. The Anganwadis are doing something right. I think Haryana, they're probably only doing food distribution, if at all that's happening. So I agree with that variation. So, I mean, what in your opinion is explaining this? That, why are children doing better when we know, as the gentleman has just said, that the teachers, Anganwadi teachers at least get some training. The private preschool teachers are really pulled off the road. They have nothing. They have no skill set. And is it that the way we are testing is reflecting rote learning? And this is really my question, is that are we testing in the correct way to evaluate some kind of critical thinking, or are we just, is our testing just so basic?
So my question is related to that. When we talk about early childhood education, we don't specify if it's a proper formal like school or if it's a daycare, for example. So when you talk about the growth of the private sector, especially in a country like India, a lot of it is like more of a daycare model for like, let's say, corporate companies, which comes under that private sector. So are we differentiating between the two? And what should we do to actually identify what counts as an early childhood educational school, for example, versus like a
yeah, again, great questions. These will actually motivate me to work further. Yeah, so I may, I'm responding, but I may not be correct on all the things based on my understanding. This is very interesting that if there is no what to teach and all that related to this also, then actually what is going on? This is not understood. Let me tell you what is going on in a preschool is not understood. I did not find any evidence on that. What is going on inside the schools? No evidence. What I did is with the data, what is the inequalities and all, which is at one level it is all right, but when we are getting into a deeper understanding of things, for instance, why private preschools are doing better, their children, is it that the way we are measuring learning outcome is different, what you are saying, or is it that they are actually doing something in that, or is it that if there is the endogenitis or association that okay, children who are going to private schools, they are anyway better off at the family, so the parents are contributing a lot to their life, so that is reflected here. Stories are not clear. For primary schools, I have explored some ideas, at least in the primary schools and all, grade 1 to 12, but pre-primary schools, nothing is being explored yet so far. There are stories which are available very clearly in the US context. I would mention Raj Chetty's work, for instance, economist. Then Parag Pathak's work in the US context in MIT. We have Hanusek work. We have, there are several other economists, Heckman, Hanusek, economists, great economists. They have estimated. There is a Perry project on early childhood education, which is also there in US. So there is great amount of interest in this particular country. In European context also, there are some, but at least in the Indian context and developing, like particularly Asia Pacific context, I don't see much. This is a great area gray area, I would say, but at the same time, great area to explore, gray and great. But I would say to one country we always look for, and India is looking for. In fact, India has sent their teachers to those countries, Finland. Delhi government of Delhi, and city where I live, they sent many teachers to Finland to get learning and to implement that in schools. Because we see Finland has a very different learning system. Earlier years, particularly in early years, so what they are doing in the classroom, how they are teaching, and all that. But I would say you cannot isolate the school from society. Very difficult, because school is a part of society. What happens? There are some schools that are experimenting in India. Even I would say that my child also attending such school where no rote learning is happening, like they don't do exams till grade 4 and all that. But the understanding of parents is very different. If the child is not coming with enough homework, those parents are worried. Why I am paying a lot, my child is coming with empty hand. He has not to do anything in the room. How I will engage him? This is the kind of him or her. This is the kind of story. So if you want to experiment a new schooling system, also very difficult. If you want to see others, like Finland, something, because I talk to parents, they say that if we'll adopt that, then my child will not able to compete at the higher level, because at the lower level, I'm not giving the load, a teaching load. So that's the kind of story that is narrating. So which kind of country we should adopt? Very confusing. But government of India, no, not government of India, I would say government of Delhi has sent some teachers to learn and all, and they are implementing. What is that impact? One should examine. Like it's sending children, like teachers to Finland and then coming back, then implementing their strategies. Whether it is improving schooling system, I don't know. There is evidence is required. Second one is fathers education wise. I looked at fathers years of schooling in one of the equations, but I can look at it. But I was so interested in mother's education because that coefficient was very high and the literature was very prominent on mother's education. So that came out. But father's education will have some impact. I saw that, but not like mother's education. So that's very. But you can say that in a patriarchal society like us, where father like dominates in decisions. But if you got an educated mother, it always it turns the decisions. So that matters a lot in all societies. So it turns actually. So that matters the most. Then you said about state subject and English medium. There is an English phobia in India. Yeah. So everywhere, if your child is going to a school and coming back and telling 2 sentences in English, your child is successful. Reading something, because this is a social status as well. Speaking English is a social status because you compare your child with your neighbor's child. Your neighbor's child is not able to speak. My child is able to speak. Okay, I'm getting all the kind of blessings. My child is what your child is, whether it is wrong grammatically, something making sense, nobody cares, because that level of understanding has not reached. The understanding is speaking English. Yeah, so all that. So that English phobia is very, and no evidence is saying that, okay, who did great in English, they did great in their life. No evidence in Indian context so far. But there is the evidence is very clear that parents want English medium schools. Parents want their child to study in English. But what happens in many cases? The parents themselves cannot read the diary, school diary. Let me tell you, this is the story. Because they are not educated. So they appoint tutors to reply the school diaries. Because they can't understand what teachers wrote in English. So they will ask somebody else to read and write some notes to send that to the school. But still, I need my child to get into the English medium schools. That's one of the reasons that there is an expansion of English medium schools, including rural areas. I want to emphasize that. That is now they are entering in. So the things are very different in Indian society. So this is the way it is happening. You said that very clearly. Anganwadi may not like children are not getting because of English is one. But I would say Anganwadis are not doing great work in the learning because they are doing many other things. I am not saying that. But in some states, what she said may be doing great because that is their state initiatives. Because Anganwadi is, I think that, this is one central sponsor. But if government is adding some resource and they are doing differently, that is a different story. But overall, I am saying this is the case. So this is very, very, so there is a clear aspirations for English and how it is impacting, I don't know. But this policy, education policy, turns the story. It tells that mothers, like your mother language gives you better. So that's what the idea, that you should teach, at least in the early years, you should teach your child with your state language, because we have many languages, each state having different languages. So we like it should be mother tongue or it should be English. This debate is not clear so far. We are debating a lot. Some evidence is being generated in the school level, but which is benefiting more, nobody knows. Some parents, not some, many parents are confused. Well, some are doing in between, some English, some mother tongue. Because I am not sure whether English will help, I am not sure whether mother tongue will help. Let us make khichdi. Khichdi in the sense mix. Both mother tongue and more English. So my child may be in between. I am not sure. The other one is gender. Gender is a very interesting story, but the global picture is saying EC, there is not much gender difference. I also did not find, but gender differences happens within kind of EC. If I have a daughter, I have a son, which is not the case. I have a son only. But I will send my son to a better private school, my daughter to EC in Anganwadi. Because I want to invest a lot. This is Indian story. Because we have dowry system. Because this is negative, like we call it negative dowry. If you invest on girls' education, so this is negative dowry. That means you are giving a dowry, good amount of dowry when you are giving your daughter to marry. Again, you are giving a kind of dowry when you are investing in children's education, daughter's education. So you are double bottom. In urban areas, among educated parents, difference is not. No, I won't say it is zero, it is not much. Rural area, less educated, huge difference between son and daughter. So you are sending both the children to schools, but you are sending to different kinds of schools. You are giving a better private tuition to son, like 1-to-1 private tuition, group tuition to daughter. Means who are together sitting and learning. So you see the difference. So difference is there because it is patriarchal, dowry, socially, culturally rigid. So all that, it's very difficult. Caste system, all that comes into the picture. Private schools are doing better. This is, I got in one of the studies I did for primary schools, I got that. There are studies by Karthik Muralidharan and there is a great economist, Karthik Muralidharan, who works on education. Asutosh, no. and Abhijit Singh, they also estimated the impact of private school learning. When you are adjusting with family factors, you are not getting much differences, but still there is difference. What I would say, the public schools are so low that there will be automatically differences. But I am not sure about pre-primary public schools. I have never gone. Visited pre-primary public schools, also the better Anganwadis who are doing better. If there is a state intervention, they are doing great. They are teaching a lot to the children. They are making some new initiative, giving new storybooks and all. So that might be impacting differently. I have not seen. But this is the story. What private schools are doing, again, I would say, I don't. Nobody knows. I would say, I can guarantee that nobody knows what private P schools are doing, what they are doing with those kids 3 to 6. I know a bit from my son's education. 3 to 6, what they do. That much experience I have, but empirically, it is not even, analytically, it is not being looked at, what they are doing. So it's very, very difficult to say when we are finding that, okay, children from private preschools are doing better. It may be the case that the learning, the way we are testing them are different, as you said. Or is it that really private schools are giving something to them? What teachers they are enrolling and all, that nobody knows. They are this, what you call, training and all. I don't know. So all that are unfolded like black box. So very difficult to get any sense of that. What else is left? I think I already, one of the ideas that I said in future research is unfolding the regional dynamics. So this Goa, Haryana, what is happening in Kerala, what is happening in Tamil Nadu, that needs to be explored, and this is an interesting area to explore. Yeah, that one clarificatory is about daycare. So that is another interesting idea. What I think I said was a lot on looking at the early years, 0 to 1,000 months and all that. Very interesting. But here it is when children are eligible to get into early childhood education, which starts at 3. Below 3, several things happen that are critically important for children's cognitive development, children's health, children's understanding, children's education. Even there will be that would connect to 3 years, because it's not 3 is not, yes. Before 3 years, connect to 3 years. But before 3 years, I have not explained. So this idea is 3 and above, 3 to 6, 3 to 5, 3 to 6. But below 3 years is an interesting area. And there are several researchers are working on that. And one among them I most recommend to read is her work, Aisha's work on 0.
I think we should stop.
No,
but thank you so much. It's been
no, no. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.